This message comes from Capital One. With the Spark Cash Plus card, you earn unlimited 2% cash back on every purchase for your business. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus. Terms apply.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. The hashtag luteal phase has become a quick way for women online to talk about that infamous 2 weeks before their period.
Your luteal phase will psychologically destroy you as a woman.
The bloating, the mood swings, the cravings, the fatigue. It just sucks.
It's worse than the actual period. Face is puffy, my body's puffy.
And this has led some folks online to take up the cycle syncing method.
It was really sort of codified in a book a couple of years ago by a woman named Alyssa Vitti. She's not a medical doctor, but she's somebody who had bad experiences with her own menstrual cycle. And what worked for her was calibrating different elements of her life to different phases of the cycle, including the luteal phase.
That is health and science reporter Lindsay Gelman. She's been following how and why cycle syncing has become such a flashpoint in these spaces online.
This idea that if our body is telling us something, whether that something is, hey, I'm tired, I could use some extra rest, or hey, I don't feel like socializing, I'd like to sort of withdraw.
The idea is that because your hormones and energy levels are lower in the luteal phase, you should do lower impact exercise like yoga, eat foods with a lower glycemic index, and even plan social events or work meetings around this time.
Being in tune with one's body feels really attractive.
According to Vitti, we've been taught to plan our lives on the 24-hour circadian schedule, which works well for men, but not for women. Because, she says, women operate on a 28-day hormone cycle. But Vitti's logic has its skeptics.
Some of our hormones are secreted in a pulsatile fashion every 15 minutes or so. So, should we be living our life in 15-minute increments based off of where the hormone is peaking?
That is Kate Clancy, a professor of anthropology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and author of Period, The Real Story of Menstruation.
The menstrual cycle schedule they are being taught by certain influencers corresponds to a mythical menstrual cycle, unlike most real cycles.
A lot of her work is dedicated to researching, expanding, and recontextualizing our ideas around menstruation for people with uteruses. And a lot of our preconceived notions about the luteal phase in particular just aren't backed up by science.
The problem is, all these folks syncing their work schedule or diet or exercise to their menstrual cycle are doing it not actually knowing whether they are ovulating, when ovulation is, and whether they even have a luteal phase.
So the luteal phase is the latter half-ish of the menstrual cycle for menstrual cycles where ovulation happens. But we have to understand that not all menstrual cycles have ovulation.
Ovulation, much like the luteal phase, has also become a hot-button topic online. It's when an egg is released from the ovary, yes, but it's also a time where hormonally some people, like singer-songwriter Lorde, say they feel their absolute best.
The singer Lorde mentioned that she had gone off hormonal birth control and for the first time in many years, I'm paraphrasing here, experienced natural ovulation and described it as kind of this almost like a drug-like experience.
And while Lorde was speaking to her personal experience, some fans felt like it played into a growing anti-birth control sentiment. Some influencers are pushing online, where experiencing the totality of one's menstrual cycle without synthetic hormonal intervention like birth control, which stops ovulation, is more feminine and natural.
The idea that if natural ovulation is sort of the pinnacle of human emotional experience, well, that leaves out lots of groups of people. And there are other ideologies that kind of share DNA with this attention to the natural self.
And that emphasis on the natural menstruation cycle, the natural hormones, the natural ovulation has crept into a space that's already historically under-researched and rife with misinformation.
I think in general, women are looking for validation, community, and support. But what does happen when that gains momentum is that other forces notice that something is catching fire and they get involved.
This is Your Body, Whose Choice? And for the next few weeks, we're looking at the cultural, legal, and ideological frameworks shaping reproductive health in America, and what this means for the near and far future of our families, our personal agency, and our planet. Today, Kate and Lindsay join me to clear up some of the misinformation around menstruation and how the search for guidance can lead to murky waters.
While it may feel attractive and validating at first to think about completely redesigning everything so that we're sort of optimizing various elements of our biology, I think that sort of philosophy risks kind of reducing women and people in general sort of to our basest impulses. And we all know that we're more than that, and that there are other factors that we might want to consider or prioritize besides exactly what our hormone levels may be leading us to feel or do at any given time in the month. And the idea that biology in every case ought to rule the day kind of has some cousins in terms of its ideology to things that feel a bit dangerous, a bit toxic, and sort of insidious when we're talking about biological essentialism and privileging the biological processes above all.
And for listeners who are unfamiliar with the term, biological essentialism is the idea that certain characteristics or behaviors are inherently linked to someone's biology or genetics, or in this case, their gender or their sex assigned at birth. You know, biological essentialism makes me think about ways that I've seen people transpose a cycle syncing approach onto their own workout schedule and determine that, well, even though they love weightlifting or some other type of intense workout, they should only be doing yoga or walking during that time.
There are two problems with it, too. One is that I think it's a total break from what we've been trying so hard in feminism to accomplish, which is to say that maybe women shouldn't be so directly tied to our biology. And so to me, this return to a conservative interpretation of womanhood is a straight line to TERFism.
Right. TERFism, or trans exclusionary radical feminism, is an ideology based around the idea that gender is not a social construct, but that gender is purely biological. Trans exclusionary radical feminists adhere very strongly to the gender binary, and they reject both trans identity and trans people more broadly.
I really worry about that. The other thing related to this problem with this biological essentialism is that it just so happens that what the recommendation seems to be is a move away from movements we might identify as masculine. So when we're saying, we need to do more gentle movements like yoga and light stretching through the luteal phase. So I'm supposed to abandon my deadlifts 2 weeks of the month?
Right. Or endurance running or something like that. And when I think even about like lifting heavy or running for long distances, those are both also spaces where women had to fight to be included. And, based upon what you both have shared, I could see a way in which this framework can kind of make these huge leaps forward in equality among genders kind of moot to a certain degree. It can make you feel like, the true progress is to return to how things were 50 or 60 years ago.
Right. It does feel like a step back to me. And creators, not all, who are recommending these sorts of approaches, abandoning your deadlifts for the couple of weeks a month, let's say, they've got a link in their bio and they're selling cycle syncing coaching or they're selling supplements that are correlated to different phases of the month. Again, not everyone. And there isn't, I guess, anything inherently wrong with trying to offer services around this, except a lot of these people don't have health or nutrition qualifications. And even if they do, there isn't research undergirding what they're selling. And in my reporting, something that's come up is this idea of just a lack of research. There's just often people who are sort of promoting this sort of framework say, there really isn't much research around this because women have been historically, systematically excluded from research. And that's fair. At the same time, it doesn't mean that any research that were to take place would necessarily support the type of framework that they're offering. And so the lack of research becomes sort of this weird fig leaf. And allows for the promotion of this idea around which there hasn't been all that much research, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like this cottage industry built around a vacuum of information or a lot of bad information. And you're saying that people are being misled by this lack of information or like glut of bad information.
Yes and no. I think it can be true that there is a historical understudy of people with uteruses and menstruating people, that actually it's been incredibly harmful the way that we've tried to restore the study of women, because it actually has further biologized them in a way that's kind of wrong, and it ignores intersex people. And, a lot of the ways we've tried to, fix some of these harms have actually not been the best. But even so, it's something. The other thing that's true is there's loads of us doing this work. The problem is that our findings are not matching what these folks would like for there to be. So I know people who do research on premenstrual dysphoric disorder. When actually measured correctly and carefully, it affects at most 6% of people.
That's not what the girls are saying on social media.
Yeah. So when using prospective measurement, PMDD only affects about 6% in a way that impacts their daily lives. That doesn't mean premenstrual syndrome, which is a more vague and broader term, isn't real. But it does mean that to the extent that it affects your quality of life, where you'd have to change what days you work or what days you hold meetings or what days you do workouts, that should really only impact a fraction of people who menstruate.
Coming up,
people just throw up their hands and say, well, if you're not going to work with me or you're not going to help me not just obsess over efficacy and validate some of my other concerns here, I'm going to just go on Instagram and see what people tell me about cycle syncing.
How medical frustration may lead some to find community online.
This message comes from Charles Schwab. When it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices, like full-service wealth management and advice when you need it. You can also invest on your own and trade on Thinkorswim. Visit schwab.com to learn more. Support for NPR and the following message come from Betterment, the automated investing and savings app. CEO Sarah Levy shares why they provide tools and technology for retail investors, small businesses, and independent investment advisors.
At Betterment, there is one unifying idea, which is the idea of expanding access. Historically, great financial advice was reserved for the wealthy, and what technology has done is basically lowered the barrier to entry and created an on-ramp for people earlier in their financial journey to get access to great advice. The same is true for small businesses, where mid and small-sized businesses have not historically been able to afford a retirement solution for their employees. So again, Betterment's technology allows smaller and smaller companies to attract the best employees. And then lastly, for financial advisors, what we've done again is expanded access by automating and using the scale that technology can provide.
Learn more at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed. This message comes from LinkedIn Ads. Target your buyers by job title, company, role, and skills with LinkedIn Ads. All the professionals you need to reach in one place. Get a $100 credit on your next campaign at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. This message comes from DSW. Where'd you get those shoes? Easy, they're from DSW. Because DSW has the exact right shoes for whatever you're into right now. You know, like the sneakers that make office hours feel like happy hour, the boots that turn grocery aisles into runways, and all the styles that show off the many sides of you. From daydreamer to multitasker and everything in between, because you do it all in really great shoes. Find a shoe for every you at your DSW store or dsw.com.
Okay, so you both have, discussed a lot of bad information, bad science, misinformation, and a lack of information in general, and how that's affecting the way a lot of people are understanding or misunderstanding the science around their bodies. It makes me also think about something that you just touched on, Lindsay, which is a great skepticism that has emerged culturally. I've seen it politically, but specifically I've seen a lot of health influencers or alternative health influencers, let's say, talking about the dangers of birth control and IUDs and other synthetic hormonal interventions. How do you reconcile the utility of these interventions with the understandable skepticism that some people have regarding the shortcomings of these interventions, with the outright vilification of these interventions.
First, I'm so glad that you started with what I think is the most important part, which is validating how people feel about them and validating that skepticism. What I think is distressing or frustrating is that contraception hasn't really changed all that much in 50 years, 60 years. We still have the same synthetic hormones, slightly different preparations, slightly different drug delivery. So we have pills, but now we also have patches, rings, IUDs, but it's all still largely the same stuff. We haven't come up with a whole lot of new ways, which means people are still experiencing the same problems over and over again of those who experience problems.
I agree with Kate. I think, and especially online and especially among younger women, Gen Z, there are young people who are expressing a lot of frustration with the stasis in terms of a lack of fundamentally new methods for preventing unwanted pregnancies.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes sense. It's like for someone who might be in high school now, they may have a grandparent who's like my mom's age and someone my mom's age and someone my age and someone in high school now all had access to many of the same tools for preventing unwanted pregnancy.
Yes, and what might have felt and often did feel revelatory to someone 2 generations back or a generation back now is feeling like a little bit of old news to a younger person. Mm-hmm. The complaint there isn't that this is not effective. I mean, this is effective at preventing unwanted pregnancies nearly all of the time, but that the side effects are objectionable, that they're, getting in the way of their experience of their lives. And I think that is a valid demand. However, I'm not sure it justifies the fear-mongering and prescriptive ideology that no one should be on hormonal contraceptives, which is what one starts to hear in certain circles more toward the fringe of social media, where we go from, hey, we really ought to keep working on these medications so that there are fewer side effects, to let's all go off them and no one should be on them because they change who we are, they mess with the fundamental biochemistry of our womanhood, and they change our personalities. The rhetoric becomes quite quickly alarmist.
I wonder, how does this obsession with like all natural reproductive care for women connect to the idea of the quote unquote natural menstrual cycle being a focal point of womanhood and femininity? And where do trans people fit into this logic?
I think that's, again, why this biological essentialism is so troubling. I think that the biggest possible tent is always useful in feminism and in the way that we understand womanhood. I think anyone who's a woman is a woman. I don't think we have to double check what's going on with a uterus or lack thereof to make any particular determination about this. So it does trouble me that we're continuing to do that. What also troubles me is that, there are non-binary people, trans men, intersex people, so people with different both sex and gender identities, where they also might be menstruating or experiencing something like a menstrual cycle, and we're completely leaving out their experiences. We have to stop having these all or nothing understandings of what's happening with contraception, with the various ways we define our gender and sexual identities, and just do a better job actually recognizing all of the variability. And to that point, also the variability in the reasons people choose hormonal contraception. So doctors tend to focus, and there's a lot of literature on this, that the way contraceptive counseling is taught to doctors and other medical personnel is that they prioritize efficacy above everything, above ease of use, above side effects, above other reasons that a person might want to be on hormonal contraception. And I think that's sort of where then people just throw up their hands and say, well, if you're not going to work with me or you're not going to help me not just obsess over efficacy and validate some of my other concerns here, I'm going to just go on Instagram and see what people tell me about cycle syncing.
We've seen this movement toward considering the body as like the ultimate truth. Women in particular are being encouraged to listen to our bodies, trust our guts, et cetera, et cetera. And in a lot of ways, I think that makes sense, especially in a society that has historically conditioned women to thwart our own feelings of skepticism and doubt and discomfort, sometimes about things that are hugely important. But I'm also wondering if this focus on, the body as the ultimate truth ends up ignoring the many social and cultural factors that actually affect many women's lives. Could this framing feel like fatalistic versus empowering? What are the potential downsides to thinking of the body as the ultimate source of health knowledge?
So, as someone who's been studying menstrual cycles for a couple decades now, and to give myself as an example, around this obsession with natural ovulation. Well, I didn't naturally ovulate for the first 13 years of my life, and I didn't feel some particular disconnection from my body. Then I started menstruating and started probably ovulating somewhat regularly after a few years of, adolescent and ovulation. I had a couple of bouts of hormonal contraception, but here's a couple other key points. I didn't naturally ovulate. The 2 times I was pregnant for 9 months. And then also the year that I was postpartum, for each of them, that I did not have a menstrual cycle at all. So, there's this idea that invoking the biological and invoking the menstrual cycle is feminine, but these other things that we also are coding as similarly feminine involve no ovulation at all. There's nothing wrong with having a biological body and paying attention to it and honoring it when you can, but we don't have to be over precious about this one piece of it.
If people derive pleasure and meaning from tapping into their own individual biological experiences, who am I to stop them? I think that's wonderful. At the same time, I'm concerned when ideas become prescriptive to other people. We don't know what's going on with other people's bodies, the sorts of processes that are going on with them, the different health conditions and concerns they may have, and the medications that they might need to take or choose to take. And so I think that paying attention to one's physiology is something that can be a very useful tool and can open up some different ideas for ways to lead a meaningful life and existence. Do I think that's the only thing we ought to be considering? Or do I think we ought to be using that to make judgments about other people? No.
Kate, Lindsay, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Professor of Anthropology Kate Clancy and reporter Lindsay Gelman. Kate's book, Period, The Real Story of Menstruation, is available now, and Lindsay's article, What is Cycle Syncing Really About?, is on the cut. And I'm going to put on my influencer hat for a second and ask you to please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening. Click follow so you know the latest in culture while it's still hot. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Alexis Williams.
This episode was edited by
Nina Pathak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR. This message comes from LinkedIn Ads. One of the hardest parts about B2B marketing is reaching the right audience. That's why you need LinkedIn Ads. You can target your buyers by job title, company, role, seniority, and skills. All the professionals you need to reach in one place. To get a $100 credit on your next campaign so you can try it yourself, just go to linkedin.com/results. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. Only on LinkedIn Ads. This message comes from Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile took what's wrong with wireless and made it right. They offer premium wireless plans for less, and all plans include high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, and nationwide coverage. See for yourself at mintmobile.com/switch.